And that'll work because in by September, the summer season here will be kind of waning, and I probably won't be reading on the plaza all day Sundays also.
Right. Okay. Also, I just wanted to mention we're now on YouTube, but aside from the Confluence, and I'm not sure we're going to perform the play at the Confluence. I want to perform it in red states, including purple states like New Mexico, over the next 18 months. And I had a lovely meeting with an old friend of mine, and he's a committed Trumpy. And
it's actually quite amazing. My stepmother mentioned that I was going to be surprised when I got here, and Taos is very blue, but in a way, but Red River, I'm surprised is Chinese vermilion red. I mean, it's surprising up there, but it's changed in the last 10 years drastically.
Right. So this is the play I want to perform. And
The Analyst and the Rabbi.
Right. And that photograph is a year after this event that's depicted. So obviously they did reconcile at the meeting that's contained in this play. And that's definitely how we have to get the country moving. And so what I want to do is perform the play. And I want to invite the chairman of the local Democratic Party or parties, as the case may be, to it, because it is what's needed in our country right now.
Right.
And so I'm currently working on John Jackson, the play Rabbi Beck. And if he doesn't do it, I'm going to find somebody else. I have another person in mind who's a lifelong friend of mine. But anyway, I'll find one.
And I think this story, the Analyst and the Rabbi, is going to be an excellent example, especially because what I've noticed as well, it's mostly about people not owning their own stuff. So individuation, self-development, and further from that, then even the conspiracy theorists are even in more avoidance, pushing things further away. So it's
absolutely.
It really only, to me, has to do with more of trauma, personal self-development, and healing in life, rather than political views. And then the less evolved or healed someone has, or less work someone has done in their own life, the more extreme their political views typically. They don't get that anti-hysterical bias where it's dignity and difference and, hey, let me listen to your culture and teach me about it.
Well, last night I had a dear friend of mine who was one of my very first followers 5 years ago when I started this program. In fact, I think the first time I met him was at the second meeting, which was the first meeting that had anybody added. And so he came to that first meeting, and we've been fast friends ever since. And so last night he was coming by Annapolis. He lives in Baltimore, so he was driving 50 miles every week to come to my reading group, and extremely loyal about that. And so I took him to the Annapolis Yacht Club last night, and we had a really nice old home week conversation for about 2 hours. And And then I was driving him back to his car because we don't have enough parking at the Annapolis Yacht Club for everybody. So I picked him up and brought him over, and taken him into Stalag 17, which is what the yacht club has become after the fire. We have all these automatic gates in front of the parking lot, and you have to have your little pass and use that to open the gate. And so there's no coming in unless you're a member,
right?
Or a guest of a member. And so after we left and we're going back across the drawbridge, I said, well, I want to tell you about the Confluence in this play I'm doing next summer for sure. And I told him about it, and he says, well, yeah. And I said, whether my fellow partners on the Confluence are going to allow it in our Confluence, I'm going to start performing it all over the country. And for the next 18 months, I'm going to do it exclusively in red states. And he says, well, we need those in blue states too. We need that in blue states too. And I said, well, yes, of course we do, but Trump has to be defeated first. And if he's not defeated, we're going to lose our country. And he says, well, Trump isn't so bad. They started to, and this is after like 2.5 or 3 hours of beautifully lovely conversation with the man. Mm-hmm. Right. And so then we got talking, and he says, why do I care about this so much? And I said, well, because of January 6th. And he says, well, that was an Antifa operation. And I said, no, it wasn't. Where did you get that idea? And he said, oh, well, I saw Antifa flags in the crowd. And I said, John, that was entirely a false flag operation. And
hence the reason no investigation. It's like
right.
Does anyone notice the 2-sided, 0-sided piece there? Right. One deception, one reality.
Right. Yeah. And I said, you did notice, right, that this crowd was waiting for Trump for like 3 hours in front of the White House, and he comes out and gives his stemwinder speech, and then they all went directly from that to the Capitol. And he said, that sort of went by him. Yeah. Okay, Big Cat, I'm allowing your comment. I don't know why it was moderated, but in any case, and so anyway, I explained, and so he says, well, and Antifa and the Black Lives Matter movement, blah, 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 blah. And I said, please give me one example of a Antifa cult, having regular meetings in the woods in the left wing. And I said, it's completely documented that there are 2,500 such cults on the right. And please tell me about one on the left. And he couldn't do it. And he acknowledged that there are 2,500 on the right. And so anyway.
Well, because the ones on the left are called cultural conversation. They're not really cults. It's cultural conversation.
Right. And so, he lives in Baltimore, so I don't need to I don't need to convince him because Maryland's going to go blue anyway. And then he says, well, why aren't you going to do it in the blue states too? They need it. And I said, I have to do it because Trump has to be defeated or we're going to lose our country, period. And then he said, then he started to weigh in on how these things go back to the Constitution. And I said, well, John, the First or Second Amendment is about organized militias, and indeed, the first four words of the Second Amendment are a well-organized militia.
Right.
And he said, well, we're allowed to have militias. I said, John, the militias they were talking about in that.
There you go. Yeah.
In that are now the National Guard. They are
right.
a well-organized militia.
That was the seed of the National Guard. And then now in context, we already have that.
Right. And so then he goes on with this, well, it doesn't say that explicitly in the Constitution. I said, we're a different country now. And then he goes into all this baloney about the Civil War and how wrong South Carolina was. Oh my God. And
well, there's another appearance versus reality there. It wasn't about race and it wasn't about the slavery. It was about cotton and sugar. It was all about economics. I mean, follow the money. And then you get again the appearance versus reality.
Yeah. So anyway,
wars aren't fought over morals. They're fought over assets.
Yeah. So at that point, we were about 4 hours into it and sitting in the car for the last hour and a half. And I said, well, that I just diffused it and said, look, I got to get home.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh.
So yeah, you had a non-complimentary tennis rally after the really wonderful tennis rally.
Right. And so, it just convinced me more than ever that we have to do this play. And as we proceed further, by Thursday, I'm going to know whether we're going to do it in the Confluence or not. But whether or not we do it in the Confluence, I think I would like to begin even this fall on it. So, that's something that I'm looking toward, and I might look to you to help me get New Mexico at least organized.
We'll see what we can do.
Talk to the right people. So think about how we can communicate with the Democratic chairman in New Mexico, for example.
Well, and actually the weekend I went up to the cabin, my stepmother said, do you know what just started right after you left? And I'm like, they said, no. She said, there was a huge Democratic rally conference at your hotel that started about 20 minutes after you left. The governor showed up and it was, official. And I came back and everyone at the front desk, you missed it. It was such a beautiful event. So I was one of those, it was another, I came to the right place.
Yeah. And, I know I can probably get it done in Helena because Tim lives right next. Tim's sister manages the theater, number one.
Well, that's helpful. Yeah, that's a little helpful.
That's helpful. And Tim himself lives right next to the mother of John Bullock, who was the Democratic senatorial candidate last year, former governor of Montana.
Nice.
And Tim's mother, there's a plaque in the State House of all the women that served in, I don't know, the early years of the Montana legislature, going back to the late 19th century. And Tim's mother is on that plaque. Her name is on that plaque.
I remember you showing us that when we were seeing that wonderful sculpture
Right.
that Tim had done.
Right. And so, yeah. And so it's going to get done in Helena at some point. I wouldn't mind going there first because it would be nicer to do it in a smaller venue. And,
right.
And to start and to have video of that event broadcast on YouTube. But eventually I want to take it to Texas. Right.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah.
Right.
You want to get that thing running Ferrari level smooth, or actually
Right.
Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton level smooth.
Right. Okay, so we've gathered 10 watching, and I'm sure they have no clue what we're talking about, but let's see what's going on YouTube before we start with Jerry. Diego says, hope you're doing well. Big Cat says, as far as I'm concerned, 45 is an incompetent psychopath. I cannot understand why people can't see through the obvious grift. Have a friend in Southern Oregon town, Facebook, said busload of Antifa was going to ransack the town at all the brainwashed right-wingers got in their trucks to drive Antifa away. There was no bus, no Antifa. Did the brainwashed right-wingers realize they had been duped? No, they claimed that they drove Antifa away. It's just so dumb and evil. And it's painful living in such dumb times. And Diego says those strategies of spreading misinformation have been adopted by the governments of Colombia and Peru to divert any protests for the respect of the human rights. I have no doubt, Diego, that it's a worldwide phenomenon. And then Diego says, I think in Brazil as well, obviously, that's more or less the situation we're going through here in Colombia. There are some individuals who just don't want to admit reality, commencing by the president itself. Yep. Okay, so Diego, Chiron Publications has published this play. It's called The Analyst and the Rabbi. It's by Murray Stein and Henry Abramovich. Murray Stein is probably the most leading Jungian analyst in the world right now. And there is a video of the play being performed with Murray in attendance and performed by 4 Jungian analysts, including the cellist, who is a Jungian analyst, and very well-known ones. And it's published by Chiron. I'll put the name in the chat so that you can see it. It's called The Analyst and the Rabbi, published by Chiron Publications. I think it's HTTP. I think I have that YouTube.
Well, thanks for letting me know that's also on video. I'll look to get that once I get settled in.
Yeah, and it's essential to watch the DVD, because you engage both sides of your brain when you do that. And when you read the play, the script, you're only engaging the analytical, rational logos side. But when you see the play, you engage the eros side.
Well, and you get the ebbs and flows of the actual content when you go with all senses, whereas you do tend to, with just reading, get projection and transference just from your expectations. And rather than the play gives you a whole new perspective that you can just steep in and experience rather than having to try to interpret.
Right. And like a movie, you don't have to be a problem solver. You just let it.
Right. Yeah.
You just let it go by you, and you sort of get into it like a movie if it's done.
It's funny. People say, oh, well, the book was so much better. I said, the book is never better. Ever. Not once. Except for maybe The English Patient, but that's an anomaly. So then the movie and the book are the same, but the movie, as anyone, as you are well aware, anyone who's a creative, I want the movie because then I'm not working. It's time off. I'm not having to, use that. I need to rest and relieve it.
Yeah. And in a sense, I have to tell you about yesterday's wisdom path also, because we had Karen Wong on, who is, a very accomplished artist. I would not call her a great master, but she is a very accomplished artist in California. And she has a graduate art school approach to art. Okay.
And the MFA kind of, right?
Yeah. And she's extremely accomplished at that. Plus, I met her through the Paul Vanderklay channel. And so I wanted her to come on mainly so that I could use it with Paul Vanderklay. And Paul has declined our invitation to be the keynote speaker. And Helen, I think he might have smelled a rat, or he'd smelled the human on the trap. And
I think it's probably more the size of an otter. A rat may be a little small.
Something like that. But anyway.
But it was playful.
Yeah, but anyway, so yesterday, Karen Wong gives her whole, idea of what you have to do to be an artist, which I acknowledge, I concur with. And anybody that wants to be a good artist should go and listen to that video, because that was a graduate school master class in delivering credible art. Okay. You can learn a lot to it. Now, the funny thing was that I had been really looking forward to that, and Colleen was going to be there, and I was really looking forward to her watching this and having her inimical comments, which after the fact were priceless on my text messaging or on my email. But during the 2 hours, she could not get her mic going for some reason. There was a glitch in her mic, and so she was there watching it, and she was getting more and more frustrated because she couldn't say anything, and I kept saying, "Colleen, we can't hear you." Oh my God. It's like the hand of God came down and silenced her.
Oh no. And honestly, I have to say, from my perspective, vast and long, Colleen to me is the ideal whole person teacher that then art comes from.
Right.
And that's it's such a higher octave and so accessible and so deep at the same time. Yeah.
Right.
So wow, that's quite an irony.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, it was a synchronicity passing understanding, I have to say.
right.
And she wrote to me afterward late last night and said, well, Wally has figured out where the bug was and has fixed it, but it prevented her from, I mean, it literally gagged
Silenced her. Yeah.
silenced her.
Gagged her. Wow.
During Karen's appearance. So for the YouTube audience and for Jordan, I really do urge you to go and listen to Karen Wong's presentation yesterday. It's called, something like, it has something like decoding the meaning or something like that. And I really, it'll be right on the top of my YouTube channel. And I really, really urge you to go see that. And in part, it truly accomplished what I wanted Karen to accomplish, which was to show Jordan why it is, Jordan Peterson now,
Right.
to show Jordan Peterson why it is that, to show Paul Vanderklay why it is that Jordan Peterson will never say he believes in God, at least not in the Christian context. He will never do that. Mm-hmm. And the answer to that question, how she does it is quite clear on the video. And she doesn't even know it. Karen doesn't know what she's done, but I do. and
it's interesting. I went to along those lines. I'm going to watch that after I finish my presentation for tomorrow night, later today when I get back from the plaza. I went to church with my stepmother several weeks ago.
Right.
She drove down, and I caught myself in every time someone says God, I'm like, okay, capital D, divine. Why don't I like the word? And I realized what it was is every time they're force feeding it, it's patriarchal, it's half. Shekinah, the original co-creative same power Godhead partner, is missing. And I can just feel it in the implication. So I look forward to watching what Karen Wong's doing there with that.
Yeah, I don't think she talked about it in terms of masculine and feminine or Sophia and God. But anyway, she definitely said why Jordan Peterson could never endorse any organized religion per se. It's not that he doesn't believe, he hasn't grokked the meaning of religion, but he could never, with 3 million followers, he could never endorse any individual religious following at all. Mm-hmm. And Paul keeps having this faint hope that Jordan is finally going to see the light and say he believes in God. And
Paul Vanderklay needs to see the light he needs to incorporate Carl Jung and depth psychology into Christianity.
Yeah, and he probably knows that at an unconscious level, because I've been exchanging email with him and talking with him for 3 years now. I don't often participate live in his sessions or even comment on them, because my hectoring is enough as it is.
Well, yeah, respectfully, no reason to create an interference pattern, especially with someone you're attempting to connect with.
Right, right. And so we're getting there, and Paul has changed his approach quite dramatically in the last 3 years, which I can recognize and see, but maybe a lot of other people don't see it yet. And so I don't want to stop that. But you know, Karen, who's a very committed Christian, and is why she was all on Vanderklay's channel and why I therefore know about her at all. She's a very committed Christian, and so she's probably looking for the same thing from Jordan that Paul is, and I just couldn't get into that with her yesterday. That would have been wrong of me to get into it.
Well, and you know, something that's come to me with Jordan Peterson relative to Paul Vanderklay too, and this is in no way to insinuate an insult or just to disparage him, more just forensic observation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally respectful of Paul, no doubt.
Yeah, and so I just want to preface
and Jordan Peterson as well. Okay,
both.
So,
and that's why I want to make a very big disclaimer that this is simply my forensic observation. Is that this whole, oh, Red Rover, let Jordan Peterson come over, we need that, is kind of a parental, please give me approval. And to me, you know, validation is for parking. You know, you know, you need to be comfortable with yourself and unthreatened, and then you can be gentle and fierce enough to be compassionate, I think, as Diane Croft said, which I totally added into the other. But I think there is that validation is for parking. You know, stop trying to get other people to support, you know, your movement. How about
your insecurities? Because of course, Colleen talks about validation, but that means,
but that's different in the process.
Validation after you're a master artist. It's not validation after you got your Master of Fine Arts degree.
Well, and what I appreciate about the distinction with Colleen's capital V validation in the process, it is that connection, that reaching out to share what you've brought back rather than looking for someone's approval. It's a complete other direction where you're literally coming to give someone a gift rather than asking them to, you know, stroke your head and say it's all okay, you know. But it feels like that's kind of a two-way street where Jordan Peterson is aptly vague in regards to his personal piece there, and that eliminates or precludes his movement being cult associated with an ecclesiastical bent. Rather, it's more what he's doing motivationally. So in a sense, he's a motivational speaker.
Well, and he doesn't want to chase away the members of his audience that are vermilion red young people, right? Doesn't want to chase them away, but you know, he knows better and he should know better.
And I think he's acutely aware that he's a motivational speaker and not a cult leader. And I respect that he wants to keep it that way, because it changes. It poisons the system if he goes to the cult force.
Yeah, and he's anguished about his role in that respect, I think. And for the YouTube audience, I've said many, many times that I agree with 99.5% of everything that Jordan Peterson says, okay? And there's only that 0.5% that I don't agree with, but it's a big 0.5. Let's put it that way. It's not just a speed bump or a stumbling block. It's a wall. And,
I
so,
do think that Jordan Peterson's primary benefit to society is that he is getting depth psychology and Carl Jung out to millions of people who otherwise would never have even known it existed.
yep, absolutely. That's the great thing about what he says about Jung. And anyway, for the YouTube audience, I hope you've enjoyed looking in on this. And one says, Jordan Peterson always says, speak the truth. And, he does do that to the best of his ability. And he, and by the way, Karen loves maps of meaning. She said she had trouble following it at the beginning, but once she got into it and rocked it, she really adopted it, right? And I agree with that. I mean, he wrote a masterful book in Maps of Meaning, and when he says he worked on every sentence 15 or 20 times, I have no doubt. Okay, no doubt whatsoever that he did that. That it's such a strong book, and it's so tightly packed. But he really needs somebody like me, who's a layman, unpacking it for people, because it's so tightly packed. You cannot read it like a novel, and you really need commentary on it in order to understand what he's saying. And I think it will be a world classic in the next 500 years. People will point back to that book almost certainly. Maps of Meaning, that is. But 10 Rules for Life, or 12 Rules for Life, and the follow-on book are less wonderful. And I'm with Kitty Flanagan, the comedian in Australia, who wrote a book called 488 Rules for Life. And she was interviewed on Australian television. And so, just for the humor in it, you really, really must go listen to that. I urge all YouTube followers to go listen to the interview between Kitty Flanagan and the Australian television broadcaster about her book, 488 Rules for Life. And one of the questions, I mean, it's totally hilarious, but one of the questions at the end is, well, Kitty, your book says 488 rules here, but you only have 271 rules. And so I don't understand that. And she says, always overpromise and underdeliver.
Which totally flips that business rule right out of the water.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh my God. So
I've got to watch that. That's good.
Yeah. And it's only a 5-minute video, but she's a comedian, and so she makes that 5 minutes worth your time, no doubt.
She sounds a little bit like Eddie Izzard, who's just so hyper intelligent, but also hilarious at the same time.
Absolutely. Let's see. Danny says, find his Maps of Meaning series pretty good. When it comes to politics, he's too conservative, in my opinion. I'm more of a lefty. Well, Carl Jung was a conservative too, and he even said about himself, "I'm conservative to a point. I still smoke my grandfather's pipe," among other things. And so I don't hold conservatism against anyone, because I too am conservative about certain things. And, that would be a pretty long conversation. So I'm not going to go there, but
Well, and also politically, I find it important to view the context of the time when viewing someone in history. I mean, for example, when I discovered that R.A. Schwaller de Lubisch, who did such the wonderful work, The Temple and Man, on the Temple of Luxor at Karnak, that I was just enamored with, I found out personally he was a fascist. I was just kind of decapitated in a bad way. But I just had to make a decision of, well, his personal life is his business. I like the work because it was architectural, metaphysical, psychological, and it had nothing to do with politics.
And you may remember the exchange between Colleen and me one time in one of her sessions. It was late in the session, but her longtime followers, I mean, people who have followed Colleen for 30 years, started to really beat up on the patriarchy and men in general. And I was getting quite offended by it. And I finally, and they were criticizing the right-wing militias, for example, very seriously. And they wanted the hero of the non-existent Antifa to come in and smite them, for example. And I said, "Oh, wait a minute. You have to stop that right now, because those men are the salt of the earth. They're my fellow Americans. And it's many of them that kept me alive in Vietnam. And so, and even the men on January 6th are my fellow Americans. And, I regard them as wrong, but they have a right to their opinion. And, as the old Irish proverb goes, dear God, please change the hearts of my enemies. But if you can't change their hearts, please turn their ankles so that we will know them by their limp."
I think that's in the same family of, praise the Lord and pass the ammunition.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we know them by their limp. I haven't heard that one. That's excellent.
My grandmother had that on a cross stitch.
I was going to say, if it was, it was cross stitch.
Right, and hung in our farm for decades. So I read it every time I went to the head.
And one thing I love about quotes and cross stitch is somebody really meant it. I mean, that wasn't just scrawl it out with a pen. I mean, you had to really mean it to finish that.
Right. And so Big Cat says Jordan Peterson is a big proponent of the current hierarchical structure that he believes is under attack. And he is certainly right about that. And yeah, he's certainly right. And I think his Logos way of talking about the hierarchy is over the top, and we need to point out that hierarchies have their place, but not everywhere. And
Well, the logos is just a fish scale unless you put the heart of the matter of the arrows in it and have them together. I mean, the ego vessel of logos and then the psyche that fills it. But if you have
Yeah,
just one or the other, if it's all arrows, it's amoebic and formless and lazy and undisciplined. And if you have no logos, you have no way to actually tune that wonderful arrows to share life with people.
yeah. And if you're truly hyper logos, ultimately in your politics, ultimately you get Nazi Germany.
Right.
And I don't think there's any modern person that thinks we ought to go live in what would have been Nazi Germany.
Right.
And regardless of whether they had succeeded in exterminating Jews, and so,
Well, and the problem
pardon?
with that logos when it's that the problem with the logos when it's that unbalanced is that then that's when you really get the conspiracies and the backstabbing, because no one really has enough heart of the matter to know what's going on anymore. They can't even trust their feelings.
Right. And on the right, or I'm sorry, on the left, there's the same problem, which is evidenced very clearly by a book called The Red Tsar, which is about Stalin, which I read cover to cover. And what happens with hyper communism, which is hyper socialism, and why the right keeps beating us up about. It's the opposite of fascism. The problem with communism and socialism perfectly is that once somebody gets in control, let's say Bernie Sanders becomes hyper Bernie Sanders and did become president, what happens is the people at the top, and not necessarily that person, because Bernie would be too old to execute this, but his henchmen would become just like the Nazis. And that is what happened in Russia with Stalin. And, Stalin just was the Red Tsar, just like the 300 years of Tsarist rule in Russia. And anyway, so, we can't have too much of either side, or, but make no mistake, we rely on socialism very heavily in all civilized countries. We rely on the fire department, whether it's a paid fire department or a volunteer fire department. It is something we use in common, we share it with all of our fellow citizens. And you couldn't make that commercial. And we have proofs of that here in Annapolis, because there are these plaques on historic buildings in Annapolis, and those plaques appear to be fire marks, which were an antique that used to be or still is highly valued in this country. And if you go on eBay and try to buy a fire mark, you're going to spend a lot of money on an original fire mark. There are some copies out there, but if you're going to get a real one, it's going to cost you. And nowadays, those marks are used. They have a statement on them that they represent the Historic Annapolis Foundation, and we here, what most people don't realize is the Colonial Williamsburg is a theme park. Okay, at this point in time, it's fenced in you can't go through it except after paying for a ticket and so on. But here in Annapolis, we live in our colonial city, and it's quite beautiful. It's probably more soulful than Williamsburg, and it is hugely historic because it was the first capital of the United States, only for 10 months before Philadelphia became the capital, and then New York, and finally in 1800, the District of Columbia. But in the beginning, Annapolis was situated ideally in the center of the colonies. It was halfway between South Carolina and Maine, and between Richmond and New York. And as a result, everybody came through Annapolis. Debbie and I were actually married in the London Town Public House, which is a historic building on the bank of the South River, where people would stay before they would take a ship from there to the other side of the the other side of the Chesapeake Bay in Chestertown, which is up the Chester River, on their way to New York from Richmond. That's exactly where they stayed, and including George Washington. And Debbie and I were married there, and my daughter had her reception, one of my daughters, in the alumni house of the Naval Academy, which is called Ogle Hall because it was the home of two governors of Maryland back in the 18th century. And George Washington mentioned it in his diary. and so when we had their reception in that building, I urged everybody to run home and put the fact that they were in Ogle Hall for the evening in their diaries, because they would be right in there with George Washington.
Nice.
So anyway, Kushbu has joined us. Wonderful. And Miles, and great to see you, Kushbu. I've been very worried about you, and I know we've had an exchange in the last week, but Jordan and others don't know that. So let me go back to some of these earlier comments. So let me go back. Okay, so Miles says, Vanderclay states there is a civil war in Christendom. What he and JBP don't want to admit is that Christendom is an anathema to who J. Jordan is. This Christendom hierarchy is what is the problem. Yeah, obviously. And that was obviously brought forward by Karen Wong yesterday, whether she knew it or not.
Well, it's out of gas. Culturally, it's evolved to such a society has evolved around it to not need it as the primary therapeutic event. We make our own therapeutic events. So I think it needs to go to a little bit higher octane fuel and a different fuel, be it depth psychology instead of control, because it is no longer the healing parent, mentor, tormentor of the masses. It's a shell. And the sanctuary is literally empty in a way.
And like Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, the church did the Inquisition for several hundred years and murdered a lot of people, just like Nazi Germany and just like Soviet Russia. Mm-hmm. And so
the Spanish Inquisition primarily was one of the most brutal historical long-term. It had legs kind of event.
Right. So, that's an issue. And the church has been using their pulpit to browbeat people for, millennia,
Well, bully pulpit is now
2,000
literal.
years.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bully pulpit is now literal. And I appreciate Miles' comment. He kind of wide ranged all the way around and really told the story in short form.
Right. So Big Cat says the Civil War fault lines runs through Christianity, but is certainly not restricted to religion or Christianity, obviously. There is a similar dynamic in Israel, Iran, Brazil, Turkey, Western Europe, India, and the Philippines, and everywhere else in the world. Not only those countries. Miles says, yes, DVC, that is true. We need to see that we all need each other and encourage each other's individuation. Miles, you're a better person than me. I'm done with it and have no tolerance. And in Toronto, you Canadians have Ford. My understanding is that he is similar to the current American right wing, and Khushbu claps. Miles says, DBC, I sometimes think PVK and his Calvinist view that humans are totally depraved, but I just cannot give up that we might have a bit of light in each other, of us, that could ignite a fire for good. Precisely. Thank you, Miles.
Yeah.
And then Danny says healthcare is important. In my country, we basically see a horror show when we look at the U.S. healthcare system. Boy, no kidding. It's a terrible thing for us too. And the only thing that saves me is that I spent 23 years in the Marines, and so I am promised basically free healthcare for life because of my service. In the U.S., if you retire from a federal agency where you had to carry a gun, whether it's the Border Patrol or the U.S. Marshal Service or what have you, or any of the military services, you can retire after 23 years, not with full retirement, but you can retire retire after 20 years. But if you were a civil servant, bureaucrat, paper pusher, and did not carry a gun, you can't retire until after 30 years of service. So there's a big distinction there. Miles says, Big J is Jesus. Jordan is not that big. And he points out that Danny admits that Canada has a pretty good healthcare system.
The only thing America wins at with healthcare is that our healthcare system is more expensive than anyone else's, and it's not even complete. I mean, the overages and the redundancies, and then basically it's driven by insurance. And mostly
it's full of fraud, I can tell you that.
Well, yeah, and insurance is one long continue to pay circle that everyone gets paid and no one loses money.
For sure.
I mean, I have to say, I was on an insurance jury trial 15 years ago, and it was an insurance company plaintiff against a defendant insurance company within their casualty company, the defendant's casualty company, as a plaintiff to the plaintiff defending against their own people. And what we fast learned, and unfortunately 2.5 long weeks, was that when I get paid my insurance claim, then my insurance company turns around and sues their casualty company for the money, who then turns around and sues their casualty company for the money. And really, it's just a big flow of money. But if they don't have to pay me the whole thing of the claim, they will still sue their casualty company for the whole amount. So then they'll make the profit of what they didn't pay me on top of the profit of getting their money back.
Of course, being paid double is a tradition in the American banking system.
Right. As you well know from your whole mortgage issue.
Yeah, right. Okay, so let's see. What have we got here? This is a good conversation today. I'm rather enjoying.
Yeah, I am too. I don't know if we're going to get to Jerry today, but it actually, I think, is apropos to the times.
And what you may not know is I've put one poll on this YouTube channel about 18 months ago, and I asked the question, what do people want me to talk about? and can you get, and I gave a number of answers: politics, religion, blah 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 blah, psychology, etc., that they could check off, right? Or they could pick in the answers to the query. And can you guess what the result was?
I think that the result was probably the other option, where then, Skip, I just like the dynamics of what you talk about each week. So just do your thing. Was it something like that?
No, it was
Okay.
Politics won.
Politics.
56%. The closest next topic was like 25%, but
wow.
I still get beaten about the head and shoulders by some followers every time I mention anything about politics. And what my friend did acknowledge last night is that, of course, I've known his politics. He's a federal employee, or he's a federal employee still. And so I knew about his politics for the last 5 years. And he complimented me on the fact that I never beat him up about his politics.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
and that's respectable, because what's the point? I mean, it's opinion is opinion is opinion. And there's also futility that goes along with opinion when you try to use the word change, in that context.
Yeah, well, what I've learned over the years, and particularly in the last 5, as I've been doing this, is, after my 2014 book and my 2007 book too, what I've learned is that you cannot change the political landscape by logic. Okay, you cannot. The logos. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's no amount of rational argument that you can use, including with my friend last night, to convince them. Okay, it just evolves into a rancorous debate, and which is why I stopped it last night and said, sorry, I have to go home.
Well, and you make a really good point there, that you can't move it or even solve it or define it by logic, because I would say comfortability with a not knowing is important, but then I'll defer to Mark Twain in regards to applying it to politics and say, well, of course, truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to make sense. And I think that's
okay. I have to close the loop on the fire marks, because the reason that's a socialized activity is because in colonial America, various groups of guys in their community would get together and they'd start a fire company, and then they would go door to door selling insurance. And if you bought their insurance, they would give you a fire mark, which you put on your house. And when there was a fire, and many homes and churches did burn in colonial America, when there was a fire, everybody would come to the fire, but only the company that saw their mark on the building would fight the fire. Everybody else would go home, or they would jeer and laugh and go drink beer and watch the company that had won fight the fire as sort of a entertainment. Maybe even a drunken entertainment, too much grog. and so, for example, in downtown Annapolis here, we have St. Mary's Church and Catholic school, but the church is represents or is the church of the oldest Catholic congregation in the United States, absolutely the oldest one. And that's because my state, Maryland, was founded by King James, the son of Elizabeth I. Go figure. But anyway, he was Church of England guy, right? Elizabeth I's father was Henry VIII, right? Who chased Catholicism out of England. And so King James I was a Catholic, or he was a Catholic. And so in what year? In the early 17th century, when my ancestors went to New Amsterdam, 1625, King James I was killing Catholics. And so finally he called up his friend Lord Baltimore and said, Baltimore, this is getting ugly. I have a colony in the New World called Mary's Land, and it is not populated. I want you to pick up your Catholics and take them there so we can stop fighting.
The internment camp with no fences. It's
right, which was all very logical. And so it wasn't Baltimore that came here, even though he got the city named after him. It was actually Lord Calvert. And Lord Calvert and Lord Calvert's family are still quite influential in the state. But anyway, he brought the Catholics, and their congregation still lives here in Annapolis. And the church, which was built in 1858, and it's quite beautiful inside, is the third church building of that congregation, because the other two burned. And so that's closing the loop on the fire mark.
the fire marks.
And why we have socialized firefighting. But it's also why we have socialized military and socialized, we have socialized military, except if you're in the military, and then it's a dictatorship. But you take that dictatorship on voluntarily, and oh, by the way, your bosses don't murder you.
Right. Well, I appreciate you going at length into the fire marks, because I didn't realize that's the notion. That's the seed of insurance right there. I mean, in terms of how the competition piece, and how someone would, sit and laugh and jeer as your house burned to the ground because you bought someone else's product, bought someone else's protection. So, and
then they would use that to go out and market their fire mark after the fire and say, well, if you'd been defended by us, you'd be saved.
Yeah, we were there cheering before your guys even got there to water.
Right.
We're looking out for you. We just couldn't do anything. Yeah. It's like,
and so there are so many of our activities that should be socialized, and healthcare is one of them, because we have no competition in the healthcare industry. The major healthcare insurers have divided up the country, and they're they're sovereign in their areas. And in California, people in California know it as Kaiser Permanente, and here we know it as MedStar or United Healthcare. But anyway, I digress. We have many activities that are socialism in this country, and they work pretty well.
Well, I think actually thinking about this with the mystical, Jerry Wright's mystical path less traveled, all of these social mores that we've been going over today, historically, current tense, they're both distractions on the mystical path, and they're also things that are important to embrace, to be present on your mystical path and not get lost off in woo-woo. My joke is I'm woo and not woo-woo, but but I think these are important frontage roads to the mystical path, to kind of try to tie, maybe too big of a pull, but to try to rope these back around, that this mystical path, especially the way Jerry Wright is expressing it, is so present and so life affirming, not so distant and disconnected. And so I think all these things we're talking about, that Miles brings up, that you're bringing up, that we're talking about in society, are those important things that are important to our path.
Yeah. So Danny Van Heck says, just in case, hi, Denmark did great at the Euro. We played too naive against Italy. And obviously, the adopting the Euro was a bridge too far, and certainly it was for Great Britain, who's now separated from the European Union. And I think that will ultimately prove to have been a mistake. But it got jammed down the throat of the people of Great Britain. And so they've Brexit
Right.
for now, and they're going to have to come back cap a hand at some point. This is why it's taken so long, because there were so many issues that had to be negotiated when they pulled out of the Euro and the European Union. When they pulled out, it just caused issues all the way up and down the line, and it's going to continue to, because it's a big deal.
Well, and especially even with Ireland being contiguous, there were a whole lot of port issues of, let's just didn't take it into Ireland because they're still part of the European Union, and we can't take it into Britain, but then we just drive it across the property line between Ireland and, so there's a whole mess there, just with the basically multiple countries on the one big island area.
Right. And Scotland wants to separate from the UK, and has wanted to since the time of Rob Roy, and long before that, in fact. And it's why whatever the name of the stone is, the stone of such and such, which is underneath the crown, or underneath the throne of England. The Queen sits on it, literally sits on it when she is coronated, when she was coronated. And that's always been a stone in the eye of the Scots. And actually,
not the Blarney.
No, it's not the Blarney stone. It's another stone, and there's actually a great movie about it, about these, I don't know, 5 or 6 Scotsmen who stole it once, successfully stole it back from the Brits, and that was a great thing for Scotland, a great unifying thing. But then the British police came and found them and took it back. So now it's back in the throne of the Queen of England, in which she sits, or whenever the king or queen is coronated, they sit on that stone, literally, or sit above it, because the stone is built into the chair. And so, I understand the motivation of the Scots, my friends, the Scots, and I know a lot about them because I served with several Royal Marines in the Marine Corps who were from Glasgow, Glasgow, I think, and they are tough sons of guns, I can tell you that. But you get them going on the England-Scotland thing, and oh my God, it hasn't gone away at all. However, they are loyal Royal Marines, and they actually gave me a Royal Marines tie one time, which I appreciated very much. But anyway, that's long ago. And let's see, what are we going to talk about here? Okay, so Big Cat says Henry VIII only liberated England from Catholicism so that he could divorce or behead his wives, and of course, that is the truth. And if you see the movie Elizabeth I, you get the gist of it very clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't change the fact that James I was a Scot. He was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, who was Elizabeth I's sister, and so in the succession for the British crown, in their infinite wisdom, Elizabeth I had been the daughter of Henry VIII, but her sister was a Catholic, and her son, James I, was the successor to Elizabeth I. And because Elizabeth I had no children, and so it was James I who sent the Catholics to Maryland. And we have many streets in Annapolis that are named of British royalty. The Duke of Gloucester Street is the street on which the Catholic Church sits, and I think it's King George Street is the street that goes immediately along the wall of the U.S. Naval Academy, the longest wall bordering Annapolis. And all of our streets are built for the carriage trade, and nobody ever wanted to widen them or anything because we live in our colonial city. And so all that history, I sit right next to it. I don't literally sit in it, but I used to, my house that I owned used to be right next to it was in the plantation of John Carroll, who was one of the four signers of the Declaration of Independence from Maryland, and he was a Catholic. And so anyway, I digress, though. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to leave the exchange between Miles and Justin aside because that's sort of between them. And Danny says, we were talking about soccer, laugh out loud. Sorry, that's probably not something you find interesting. Well, actually, it's become more interesting in my dotage, but I know why Americans fall asleep watching. They could actually do without the first 115 minutes of any soccer match and just cut to the chase at the end, because it always it very often comes down to the last 5 minutes of the game. And we Americans like the rough and tumble of American football, and we don't mind beating up on each other. Mind
personally, I love watching soccer on a Mexican channel, because when you get the GOL and then 28 L's, go, it's like there is so much enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So much enthusiasm.
Yeah, and I have an Irish son-in-law who's very much, well, he's into Gaelic football, which is even rougher than rugby.
In rugby, right?
Right, and in his youth, he was an Irish national star in that sport, but he's now almost 50 guy, and so those days are long gone. But I'm sure we have a lot of Gaelic football in the Boston area, and so I'm sure his son is going to be exposed to that. And let's see. So Diego was talking about Baha'i, and Justin said, I think Justin has told us in the past that he follows Baha'i, and I have tremendous respect for Baha'i, of course. I've been to the Baha'i temple, I guess, in Delhi, which is quite impressive. But that's about the limit of my knowledge. Let's see. Kushbu says, reminds me of Kohinoor diamond Queen has stolen from India. I agree, absolutely, Kushbu. One of my failed business enterprises was in Hyderabad, where the Kohinoor was found. And the Kohinoor was the largest diamond in the world. And it may still be, I'm not sure, but as Kushbu rightly says, the Kohinoor was grabbed by British colonialists long ago and went to the crown jewels. And then Prince Albert, in his infinite wisdom, decided to have the Kohinoor cut. And I think it was something like 186 carats, and he had it cut. And when it was cut, I think it went down to like 100 carats, one diamond, perfect one diamond. And I believe it's still in the crown jewels. And at one point, when I was working on Indian real estate, I wanted to build the tallest building in Hyderabad. And my partner and I were working on that when the collapse of 2008 occurred, and it was to be called the Bhavana Diamond. That was going to be the name of the building. We actually had it designed by a local professional architectural firm. We had all kinds of things. We had a $30,000 video animation made of it, in which this woman is walking through all the venues of the building. Oh my God. I was once sued for failing to pay for that work after 2008. And I finally got the architectural firm to settle the claim, which was, I think, about $80,000. They settled it for 20. For various reasons, as usual, we were both right, but I had to get on with my life. And so my Indian partner, in his infinite wisdom, and we're still quite close, paid the $20,000 because I had nothing left at that point in 2008. And so, I got out from under that one, but it's, it's like the lawyer character in The Godfather. I have one client and he demands to hear bad news immediately. And I'm like that. I have one client and have had all my life, except when I was actually practicing law before 1979. But it did come in quite handy in 2008 and after, because of all the crap that was going on at that time. Let's see, where are we going to go? So anyway, going back to Khushbu's comment about the Kohinoor, one of the things that we were in the process of trying to do was to persuade Britain to at least loan the Kohinoor for the opening of that building. Under strict guard, of course. And you people who are watching here may probably not know that the center of India was a hugely volcanic area about 200 million years ago, and it's called the Deccan Traps. You should look it up if you don't know about the Deccan Traps. But it was hugely volcanic, and afterward there were quite a few minerals discovered in that area because they got coughed up from the center of the earth by the volcanoes. And so, one fine day, some Indian was wading through a stream near Hyderabad, and there was the Kohinoor right in the bottom of the stream, just waiting to be picked up by someone. And so he did, but the British government at the time grabbed it for the Queen. And actually, I don't know if they grabbed it for the Queen, but it's certain that the Queen grabbed it and put it in the crown jewels. And what else should I say about that? So look up the Deccan Traps, look up the Kohinoor, because I think it's still the largest diamond in the world, although Prince Albert, who was Victoria's husband, had it cut down. I'm not sure if the Hope diamond is the smaller part that got cut away. It's a possibility. I don't remember for sure. But anyway, I concur with Khushbu that the Indian government, after it gets its act together, should demand Britain give it back, because it's not rightfully British. And in some way, there's poetic justice in the universe, because in 1953, the British Raj of India lasted at least 250 years. I don't remember the exact number of years, but in 1953, which was 6 years after Indian independence, a group of British anthropologists came to Britain for a 1-year study on the topic of what percentage of the Indian population at that time, 6 years after independence, knew that the Raj of 250 years was over. What percent knew it was over? And after a year's study, what they found was that 99.9% of the Indian population didn't know it ever began. So it's just poetic in that way, in some way.
Well, when my dad was teaching in Iraq right before Desert Storm, there were all these billboards, of course, of Saddam Hussein. And my dad looked up and he said, well, I guess it would be a shame not to have so many pictures of yourself when you're that photogenic. And the other professor colleague there, who was at the university there in, I think, Mosul, said, oh, that's his game. The people don't care about that. We just mind our business and stay out of his. So it's like, it's so the whole sub piece of the country running as the kind of deep water silently flowing, not even aware, say, of that the Raj above was even a thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Big Cat is saying that the coach of the Chicago Bears football team said if God wanted us to play soccer, he wouldn't have given us hands. And Big Cat, I will certainly answer that Khushbu is most certainly in India. She is my reading partner on the Bhagavad Gita. And over a period of 5 months last summer, she and I read the Bhagavad Gita. She read it in Sanskrit, and I read it in 3 versions of English translation, which were quite different, very interestingly so.
I would like to publicly and personally thank Khushbu for inquiring about how I was doing when I hopped off on my move, and which was quite a long process. And I appreciate, Khushbu, I appreciate your concern and asking. Thank you.
Hi, Nick. I'm going to leave your comment till later, but I'm going to need you and Helena next summer just for the record. And we have to talk about that. But anyway, Khushbu says, referring to the Kohinoor, it's a big blue stone on the main crown of the Queen of England. I don't doubt that. That's not a fact I knew. So obviously it would be very difficult to get it to India for my building opening, but that was my dream at the time. And I was not aware of that. So if I knew that, I would know what a fool's errand it was to think in that way.
Well, and I think, isn't the Hope Diamond a canary diamond rather than blue? I think a Hope Diamond in 1851 was displayed. If I don't remember my facts, but I think the color saturation, the Hope Diamond is blue. I think I mean the Kohinoor is blue. I think the Hope, is it clear or is it yellow? They may be completely different stones.
I don't remember, but for the YouTube audience, the Hope Diamond is in the Museum of Natural History in the Smithsonian in Washington. And so if you would like to see it, you can see it there. As for the British captive in the crown jewels, I think that you cannot see it. There's a funny corollary to that story, because the Church of England, Henry VIII's church, also is in Annapolis, and it actually has a more prominent position in the city than the Catholic, than St. Mary's. And the Episcopal Church is situated, there are two circles in downtown Annapolis. One is State Circle, which has the Capitol building in its center, the only wooden dome of any state capitol in the United States. All the rest have burned, and so now they're not wood anymore, but not so in Annapolis. Benjamin Franklin put the weather vane on the top of that building. Just, little asides. He was like a winner of the Nobel Prize, which didn't exist in 1757. He had won some sort of prize for the discovery of electricity or something by flying his kite. That's the old story. But the Episcopal Church is on Church Circle, which is one block from State Circle. And I think it's called St. Anne's, but in any case, the British Crown, because this was a British colony, had loaned on loan chalices from the crown jewels to that church. I don't know what the terms of the loan are, but what I do know is that after the revolution, nobody ever thought of giving them back. But they are still carried on the books and records of that church as on loan from the British Crown. And they're literally priceless. And so they've been unable to insure them. And so the church had to build a vault right off the main sanctuary to contain them. And apparently, I've never seen this, but on occasion they do bring them out and do communion service with them, but then they put them back in the vault immediately. And little known fact.
I just cross-checked my canary diamond comment with the Hope. They're both blue, so I was in error with that.
Kohinoor
is blue, and the Hope is also blue. It's not a canary as I thought. I must have been remembering some other historic jewel that
okay.
was a giant canary diamond.
Okay, so thanks for that clarification. I didn't know. Let's see.
Yeah, it's going to give me a little field trip later too. Now I kind of want to know, is the Hope the piece that was cut from the Kohinoor?
Yeah, I just don't know the origin of the Hope, but maybe it is. So Khushbu had observed that the British had stolen lots of things around the world and from India. And
Someone once made the comment to me, well, Jordan, it would be quicker to list the countries that England had not invaded, because the list is vastly much shorter. Most every other country has been in some way tried to, the empire reaching out.
Miles will be the first to tell you that Elizabeth II is still the Queen of Canada. Canada is independent and has its own prime minister and government. The Queen of Canada is Elizabeth II, and Charles, I learned, is a colonel in the Canadian Army, in one of the regiments of the Canadian Army, which I learned when I was serving as a company commander in Rochester. But I guess Charles could sometimes wear his Canadian colonel uniform if he wanted to. And Big Cat says, we live in a crappy world as far as I'm concerned. Well, it's way better than the alternatives, I can say. And
well, have you seen the cartoon with all just a normal day in medieval times? And everyone's banging each other over the head with a hammer, and their ears. I don't know if we're civilized, but we're not doing that as much. At least
a little less.
A little less.
We still have slavery in the form of private prisons in the United States, and max sentences going to Black people while white people get slaps on the wrists. And so that puts the Blacks back in slavery, where they are used for commercial enterprise right now. I think they get paid 23 cents an hour instead of the going minimum wage in the U.S., which is $7.25, and many employers are not able to find anybody at $7.25. So I know at my local Dunkin' Donuts, they now put little road signs out in their parking lot saying we're now hiring $15 or $18 an hour, I think they're saying, because they can't get anybody at minimum wage anymore. And so Big Cat says there's no justice in the universe, just amoral laws to follow and amoral politicians to follow. I'm reminded of the movie All the President's Men, where I'm sorry, I'm starting to have short-term memory loss as an older man, so I have to restructure my memories anymore. But Robert Redford played the lead in All the President's Men, and so he's at the door of Ben Bradley at the end of the movie, and he's apologizing for a mistake that he made sort of in the middle of the Watergate crisis. He made a mistake, and it caused the Washington Post to have to print a retraction, and there was a big hullabaloo over it. And so he's at Ben Bradley's door, apologizing right at the end of the movie. And Ben Bradley says, well, take tomorrow off, dust yourself off, and get back to work, because if you don't, we're going to lose the country or something like that. And that was it. And so Big Cat says he loved the Bhagavad Gita, and if you want to hear Bushku read it in Sanskrit and me to read it 3 times in different English translations, you can easily find that on this YouTube channel. I urge you to go take a look. Let's see. And one says, karma has a long memory. We are living in karmatic times. Truth is being revealed and is unstoppable. Never truer words were spoken. And Justin says Elizabeth II is also Queen of Australia and New Zealand. Yes. And the entire Commonwealth of Nations, if memory serves. So Miles says, we now have a Governor General, Commander in Chief, Ms. Mary Simon, who is, I guess, Inuit or Inuk, which would be a First Nations woman from the north of Canada. Very interesting. All these things are very interesting developments, and the history books about this time will be, well, they will outweigh current libraries, I would say. Within 200 years, they'll outweigh all current libraries. That's my projection, and I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, I hate the crime that's being found. Not so much that it's being found, but that it occurred with the kids in the schools. But that it's coming to light, I'm glad, because it shines a light to make it stop now.
Yeah,
it's like the Dalai Lama went through that. Just this needs to stop.
Yeah. So Jordan, let me ask you this question. If we did this an hour or 2 later, would that work for you, do you think?
Yeah, it will. Even because I won't be heading to the plaza to read through the day until around noon on Sundays. It's too quiet in the morning. And this morning I scheduled readings, just private readings at 9 and 10. So I just won't. If we're going to do that, I'll put them earlier or later. So that will work just fine. So the Sunday morning slot, I'm flexible. I like the 6 a.m. That's a great time in the morning. But just let me know what you want to see. And Sunday is a greatly flexible day. I can make it happen.
I would prefer 9 to 11 if Eastern time, which would be
7 to 9.
7 to 9 your time, if you're up for it, because while radiation therapy for prostate cancer is itself a piece of cake, the side effects are vast. And I've had now 18 treatments. I have 25 to go. And by the way, if anybody on the YouTube channel ever gets a diagnosis of prostate cancer, do contact me right away, and I will tell you what to expect. And because the doctors won't tell you, they will. They obfuscate because they want to suck you into the treatment before you really know what the consequences are. and And so you deserve to know. And if you're hearing this either today or in replay, you know, you have a friend here, and I'd be happy to give you the true gouge. But what I would say to all men, since 85% of the following of this channel is young men between 18 and 44, I would say to all men, make sure you get your checkups every year and without fail, and know that basically all men have prostate cancer at some point in their life. Most live with it, or die with it, not from it. And so, but that's only because of radiation treatment and other medical advances. So if you don't get it early enough, you will die of cancer. And so please be quite vigilant, and don't hesitate to contact me if you have a diagnosis. And so anyway, if we could do 9 o'clock and that would work for you and your timing, that would be terrific. I'll change the time until.
Yeah, certainly. I think that works. That'll just be excellent. I'm usually up around 5-ish. So that's just, I'll have more morning time, and that's Sundays are always pretty open. So yeah, just get it to where it's going to work for you, and know that if we need to adjust it again at any point, let's do that too. So it works just great.
Well, very honestly, at the beginning of this conversation, I was ready to call a halt to this altogether, because the original purpose was to involve my friends in China who can only watch via Zoom. They don't have access to YouTube. And that purpose is accomplished because our friend who has been with us a few times has been admitted to Pacifica, and she won't be coming this fall, but she's working on her visa, and she will be taking the classes remotely this fall.
Good for her.
From Beijing. So there's been a good purpose here, but
well deserved too, because
yeah. No kidding.
She's got a great sensibility and a wide-ranging perspective that's really astute, I have to say, from what I've read of her work that she's asked me to take a look at.
And speaking for myself, I'm nothing but a rebel. So when I heard that restriction on the Chinese, I said, well, I can find a way to get around that.
Well, you know, I laugh. My rebel first showed up actually with tarot. I think I destroyed a pair of my mom's shoes or something. I was 7, so I wasn't allowed in the walk-in closet anymore, just the other ones.
Right.
So, but I knew where a tarot deck was. And so the little zoning administrator loophole finder in me put my foot in the door, against the door jamb, in the casing, and I held on to the casing trim, and I reached as far in and grabbed it, because she said nothing about the airspace of the closet. What that meant, walking on the floor. And so she said, how'd you get the deck out of the closet? You're not allowed in there. I said, well, you didn't talk about airspace. So I just reached in there. So
there's
I
always
get it.
catch-22, right?
Yeah. Always a way around it.
Okay, so everyone, thank you so much for being with us today. We will begin 1 hour later, a week from today, which will be 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Got it.
And thereafter, we'll have a later hour, and our friend in Beijing can also get on. It's still 9 p.m. for her, so it's still doable. Anyway, peace, everyone.
Everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
morning.
Good morning. How you doing? Hello, how you doing?
Heading to the kitchen.
Oh, okay.
It's my daily walk here. Okay, I had breakfast.
Okay, good. Well, you can come over anytime. Skip is done and they're doing the takeoff from the runway is at in 20 minutes or 10 minutes. But then it takes them 40 minutes. What's that?
I will break that.
No problem. Well, I've got the whole thing recording, so it doesn't matter at all. But at 40 minutes after they take off is when the orbital spaceship separates from the mothership and goes up in the edge of space. So,
I have to get showered, so.
yeah, well, take your time. Take your time. There's no rush. I just wanted you to know that you can come anytime you want to.
All right, will do.
Yeah. All right. See you eventually.
Okay, I get stuff going.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Space as a solution. Space as playground. That's a scores the exercise working on. Where there's audacious, which that's